She poured the broth herself. She held the bowl to his lips, and she watched him swallow. By the time the church bell struck 6 the following morning, Richard Chesham was a corpse. It was the 14th of February, 1850, Valentine's Day, and he was the third man to die inside that cottage in less than 5 years. The doctor came. He signed the paper. No one, for a long time, asked why. Hello, everyone. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from. Your support is what allows us to keep researching stories like this one. Now, let us begin. It was the winter of 1850, and in the village of Clavering, in the county of Essex, England, the fields lay dead and flat beneath a pewter sky, and the roads turned to black mud after the first November rain and stayed that way until March. Clavering was a working village, fewer than 600 souls, most of them tied to the land, to the farms, to the clay soil that gave up its yield reluctantly and froze hard in January. The nearest town of any consequence, Saffron Walden, lay 7 miles to the northwest along a road that carriages avoided and men on foot dreaded. The women of Clavering understood survival as a practical matter. They stretched sixpences into shillings. They buried infants and returned to the stove by morning. They did not speak of hardship, because hardship was simply the condition of their lives. Sarah Chesham was 40 years of age, broad across the shoulders, plain in her dress, but she had the reputation of a woman who kept her composure in difficulty, and she had known considerable difficulty. 2 sons, dead, a lodger, dead, and now a husband. The village whispered. But whispers, in Clavering, did not carry far. What would carry far, very far indeed, was the name of Alfred Swaine Taylor, and the small glass vials he would hold up to the light in a laboratory in London, and what he would find inside them. To understand what happened at Clavering, one must go back to the September of 1845, and to the sight of 2 boys playing in a lane. Their names were Joseph and James Chesham, 10 and 8 years of age respectively, and they were, by every account, healthy children. They played in the mud as Essex boys played, chased rooks out of the kitchen garden, and quarrelled over nothing in the way that brothers do. On a Tuesday in the middle of that month, both fell ill. The onset was sudden. Both complained of burning in the stomach. Both suffered a violent thirst that seemed only to worsen with water. Within the week they were confined to their beds. Within a fortnight, both were dead. The village doctor, a man named Jones, examined the boys and recorded the cause of death as natural illness. It was a season of fever. Children died of fever. This was the understanding of the time, and nothing, in the autumn of 1845, was thought further of it. By the close of 1847, a young man named Solomon Taylor was also dead. Taylor had taken lodgings with the Cheshams some months before his death, and had, during that time, become, in the language of the village, rather too well acquainted with Sarah. He had arrived in good health. He had grown pale by October. By the first week of November, he was carried out of the cottage in a wooden box on a morning when the frost had glazed the lane. The doctor came. He signed the paper. The parish buried Solomon Taylor without ceremony, and the winter closed over the grave. By the close of 1849, Richard Chesham himself began to fail. He was a quiet man, given to work and to silence, not given to complaint. But in the weeks before Christmas, he complained. He spoke of a burning in the chest that came on most acutely after meals. He grew thin. He grew confused. He lay in the low-beamed bedroom while Sarah brought his broth and tended his fire, and he told a neighbour who came to call that he thought he was getting no better. He was not getting better. On the 14th of February, 1850, Richard Chesham died. He was buried 3 days later. The ground was hard. It was a local man named John Calthorpe who could not let it rest. Calthorpe had known the Chesham family for years. He was not, by disposition, a man who involved himself in the business of his neighbours, but the deaths in that cottage had accumulated in a way he could not ignore. 2 children, a lodger, and now a husband, and in the weeks after Richard Chesham's burial, he walked to the constable's office at Clavering and stated carefully that he believed the matter warranted looking into. He was not a dramatic man. He did not use the word murder. He said only that there had been a great many deaths in that house and that he thought someone should ask why. The constable forwarded the concern to the superintendent at Saffron Walden. What the superintendent discovered when he began to look was that this was not the first time Sarah Chesham had attracted official attention. In 1846, following the deaths of Joseph and James, a local inquest had been convened. The jury had returned a verdict of natural causes. No further action had been taken. The matter had been set aside. But now a second fact surfaced, and this one changed everything. A woman named Mary May, a neighbour of Sarah's, and by several accounts a close acquaintance, had been convicted and hanged the previous year for poisoning her half-brother. May had used arsenic, obtained from a local chemist. She had administered it in small doses, over weeks, until the symptoms appeared indistinguishable from fever or colic. She had been caught because someone asked questions that no one had thought to ask sooner. It was noted that Sarah and Mary May had been seen together on multiple occasions. It was noted in the village that the two women had spoken of things that women in their circumstances spoke about: the difficulties of marriage, the cost of supporting a household, the slow arithmetic of poverty. It was also noted that Sarah had recently begun a connection with a man named Thomas Newport, a farmer of local means. Newport was alive. He had been a regular visitor to the cottage in the months before Richard's death. In the first days of March, 1851, orders were issued. The graves of Joseph, James, Essex and Richard Chesham were opened. Nothing was said to Sarah. She went about her ordinary business. The exhumations were carried out in the early days of March 1851, and the men who broke the ground did not find what they had expected to find. The bodies of Joseph and James Chesham, buried nearly 5 years prior, had not decayed in the way that bodies buried 5 years in Essex clay ought to have decayed. The examining physician, Dr. Thomas Hawkins, noted this with care and with professional restraint because he understood exactly what it meant. Certain substances preserve organic tissue. Arsenic is among them. He made no public declaration. He took his samples. He sealed his containers. He recorded what he observed. The body of Richard Chesham was disinterred on the 8th of March. Dr. Hawkins attended personally. The stomach was intact. Its contents had been preserved with a completeness that, in his experience, argued strongly for the presence of a foreign compound. He removed the lining of the stomach, portions of the intestinal tract, and a quantity of material from the viscera. These were placed in sealed glass jars, labelled, documented, and forwarded under official instruction to London, specifically to the offices of Mr. Alfred Swaine Taylor, lecturer in medical jurisprudence at Guy's Hospital and the foremost expert in England on the detection of poison in human remains. Back in Clavering, it was not possible to keep the exhumations a secret. Word travelled the way it always travelled in small villages, through the shop, through the lane, through the women who gathered at the churchyard gate and spoke in lowered voices. The schoolmaster noted that attendance fell in those days. The constable noted that the lanes near the cottage were unusually empty by evening. People kept inside. People waited. A constable was posted at the lane end near the Chesham cottage on the evening of the 12th. 2 officers arrived from Saffron Walden the following morning. The cottage was placed under observation. Sarah Chesham was informed that she was required to answer certain questions. She said she had nothing to hide. She was asked to remain in the village. She agreed. In London, Alfred Swaine Taylor opened his sealed jars and reached for his instruments. The results had not yet been returned, but they were coming. Alfred Swaine Taylor worked methodically, as men of his profession were trained to do. He had received the samples on the 12th of March, in 1851. He began his examination without delay. The technique he employed was the Marsh test, developed in 1836 by the chemist James Marsh, and by 1850 the definitive method for detecting arsenic in biological material. The process was precise and damning in equal measure. Tissue was dissolved in acid, hydrogen gas was passed through the resulting solution, and if arsenic was present, it would deposit itself as a brilliant metallic mirror on a glass surface held above a flame, unmistakable, incontrovertible, and impossible to explain away. The glass held up to the light in Taylor's laboratory that March showed a bright and perfect mirror. The stomach lining and intestinal contents of Richard Chesham contained arsenic in significant quantity, sufficient, in Taylor's professional judgment, to confirm repeated administration over a period of weeks. The clinical picture was consistent: the burning in the chest after meals, the cramping, the progressive weakness and loss of appetite. Every symptom Richard Chesham had described in his final weeks mapped precisely onto chronic arsenical poisoning. Every one. Taylor then turned to the samples taken from the bodies of Joseph and James Chesham. The degradation of 5 years in the earth meant that he could not state the precise quantity with the same confidence, but the compound was present, in both boys, in tissue that had endured in the ground far longer than it ought to have because arsenic had held it there. Taylor recorded his findings in careful formal prose and forwarded the report to the coroner for the county of Essex on the 21st of March. 2 days later, the warrant was issued. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps us continue this research and share stories that deserve to be remembered. We read every comment, so please do leave your thoughts below. Now, let us return to Essex, 1851. On the 23rd of March, 2 constables arrived at the cottage in Clavering before dawn. Sarah Chesham made no statement when she was taken into custody. She was conveyed by cart to the lock-up at Saffron Walden. While she sat in custody, officers searched the cottage and, beneath a loose board in the kitchen floor, recovered a small quantity of white powder wrapped in a square of linen. It was sealed, labelled, and sent to London. But Sarah Chesham was remanded to await trial at the Essex Assizes. The charge was wilful murder. The Essex Lent Assizes opened on the 25th of March, 1851, at the Shire Hall, Chelmsford, before the Honourable Mr. Justice Park. The crowd outside the building had formed before dawn. There was not room in the public gallery for all who wished to enter. The Essex Standard and the Chelmsford Chronicle had both covered the case extensively, and across the county, indeed, across much of England, the name Sarah Chesham had become a name spoken at kitchen tables and in public houses alike. Mr. James Mullins led for the prosecution, and he did not waste the court's time. He called Alfred Swaine Taylor first. Taylor presented his findings in the flat, and formal language of a man who had given expert testimony many times before, and who understood that precision was more persuasive than drama. He stated that the arsenic found in Richard Chesham's body was present in a distribution consistent only with deliberate, sustained administration. He stated that the white powder recovered from beneath the kitchen floor had been analysed and found to be white arsenic, the precise compound identified in the deceased. The powder weighed approximately 2 drachms. A chemist named George Bright, of Newport in Essex, testified next. He stated that he had sold arsenic to a woman answering the description of Sarah Chesham on 2 separate occasions in the months preceding Richard's death. The sales had been recorded in his register as the law then required, but though no name had been given at the point of purchase. Neighbours followed. A Mrs. Foster, who lived 3 doors along the lane, testified that she had visited the cottage in January and found Richard bedridden and greatly reduced. Sarah, she said, had remarked on that occasion that she did not expect him to last much longer. The words had struck Mrs. Foster as cold. She had not acted on them. Now she understood why they had struck her so. The defence called no witnesses. Sarah Chesham made no statement from the dock. The jury was absent for 47 minutes. When they returned, the foreman spoke a single word: guilty. Mr. Justice Park put on the black cap and pronounced sentence of death. Sarah Chesham stood quite still. She was led from the dock. The courtroom was cleared. Outside, the crowd moved silently away through the grey Chelmsford afternoon. The execution of Sarah Chesham was carried out on the morning of the 14th of April, 1851, at Springfield Jail in Chelmsford. She was the last woman to be publicly hanged in Essex. They came in their thousands, from Clavering, from Saffron Walden, from the towns along the road, on foot, by cart, by any conveyance available, and they gathered before first light outside the walls of the jail. Vendors moved among them, selling broadsheets bearing a sensational account of the crimes and a final confession attributed to Sarah Chesham. Whether that confession was genuinely hers, or whether it was composed in the print shop the previous evening for the purpose of sales, the records do not say. The broadsheets sold well regardless, and the drop fell at 8 o'clock precisely. Death was recorded as immediate. By 9:30 the crowd had gone. The Essex Standard published a long editorial in the days that followed. Its argument was direct, that the ease with which arsenic could be purchased from any chemist in England had made it, in effect, a tool of domestic murder available to anyone who knew where to ask. The editorial called for reform. Parliament listened. In 1851, the same year as the trial, the Arsenic Act was passed, requiring that all purchasers of arsenic sign a register in the presence of a witness, and mandating that all retail arsenic be coloured with soot or indigo so that it could not be dissolved invisibly into food or drink. It was an imperfect law, as such laws tend to be. But it was a beginning. It acknowledged, for the first time in English statute, that the sale of poison was a matter of public safety, that the pharmacy counter was as much a site of potential harm as any dark lane or isolated field. The names of Joseph, James, and Richard Chesham did not appear in any further official document after that year. The cottage on the lane was let to another family before summer. The graves in the churchyard were not given new stones. Solomon Taylor's name disappeared entirely from the record. Clavering remains a village. The lanes are narrow in autumn, and the hedgerows press in close and cut the last of the evening light from the ditches. The church is old. The soil underfoot is the same heavy Essex clay it has always been, slow to give anything up. The file sits in the county record. It is bound in brown linen, tied with a single cord, and set in the dark among other files from other years, where it has sat undisturbed for a very long time. It does not ask to be opened, but it does not refuse.